Thanks. So welcome, Brett.
Thanks very much.
You've met everyone. So brief intro to Brett. So I met Brett a few years ago on the same day that I met Herrick, actually, at David's office, his old office, actually, in Surrey Hills. And well, Herrick impressed me the most, actually, but Brett also impressed me in what he was doing. And at that time, I'm not sure what you were doing at that time. And it was you weren't. I don't think you were with Word Vision still. But
no, I think I was in Vanuatu at that time. But,
Vanuatu, okay.
Yeah.
But and then Brett and I connected through a couple of other people. So I've known him for a few years and kind of kept in contact, partly in connection with his work and our work in Ranonga, but also Brett knows all the surf spots in Western Province, Solomon Islands. And so I occasionally call him up and say, "Oh, have you surfed here?" Or I'm still hoping to surf that Skull Island break one day. And so Brett has spent 20 years basically in leadership roles in a variety of organizations, but primarily connected with First Nations projects and people, both here in Australia and in Melanesia. He's done some really interesting stuff. Most recently, he was, correct me if I'm wrong, but you were an advisor to the Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea around the COVID response for that nation. And you also worked extensively in Solomon Islands. You were part of the first response to the earthquake in 2007, country manager for World Vision. You've since gone on to work with Indigenous organizations. I had a look this up. At the moment, you're the CEO of, is it Nanyanjara Health?
Maybe that's a little bit old, but yes, I've done that job.
Done that job previously.
Nanandada is the name, yeah.
Nanyanjara, okay. So the very remote community in WA, and at the moment you're chair of the board of Rocketship, which is a health-centered NGO in the Pacific Islands, including our favorite country there in the Solomon Islands. You've also been an advisor to the Vanuatu Ministry of Health, right? I saw on your LinkedIn profile. So, and a whole bunch of other really interesting things. So, I asked Brett to speak to us about leadership because this is kind of our theme for the 6 hot weeks. And Brett's got a really interesting perspective on leading, particularly in these First Nations communities and initiatives. So, I might just kind of launch. Or maybe I'll hand it over to you, Brett, and maybe I won't ask you a question. I've got some questions to ask you, but maybe you can add anything to your intro, maybe a bit of context for some of the advice you're going to give us.
Yeah, sure. Thanks very much, Ian. I really appreciate this opportunity. I know leadership in any context is difficult, but in development context, I think sharing these lessons is really important. I can only say I've had a lot of lessons in my leadership roles, and I look forward to sharing a couple today. I'd just like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands we're all standing on. That's fairly common to do in areas where I work. For me right now, that's the Turrbal people, and so I acknowledge the traditional owners past and present. As Ian has said, I've spent a long time, 20 plus years working with First Nations people in both Aboriginal communities of Australia and in the Pacific, and had a number of senior roles advising and supporting, mostly in the health space, but more broadly, as Ian's mentioned, with development NGOs like World Vision. But that's probably enough for now.
Okay. So the first question that I wanted to ask you is about, deciding what matters most, right? So when you're faced with these situations, and particularly in these really acute disaster responses, which you've participated, there's so many priorities, and everyone comes to you, and we experience this to a lesser extent, when everything's urgent, nothing's urgent, but there are a few things that matter a lot more than others, right? So how do you decide as a leader and with the people following you or partnering with you, what matters most and what to cut away?
Yeah, really good question. Thanks, Ian. So one of the hardest lessons for me, I've had to challenge a lot of the assumptions I've got around what are those priorities. And so usually you come because of, differences in education, for example, you come with a set of priorities that are known to you without actually really thinking through what are the local needs, what does being locally led, or what we call adaptive programming look like, and I think one of the key lessons I would like us to take away from today is the importance of being flexible and locally led, and being able to challenge assumptions, and that includes what you bring to the table, what others bring to the table, and being able to have some robust dialogue and conversations about those priorities. In most places I work, there is a word in language for this kind of working together. And in an Aboriginal Australian context, that's called the Malparrara Way. In Papua New Guinea, where I've just spent three plus years, that's working in one bell, spelt WANBL, but really just chiming together. So
You guys are still there?
Yeah. It's Brett. I might just pause the video, or can you cut it out?
I can just edit it later.
Okay.
Oh, he's back. He's back. We lost you for about 40 seconds.
Oh dear. Sorry.
The last thing we heard was your reference to chiming together.
Okay.
One
bell. So yeah, I was just saying that it's so important, the concept of having respectful dialogue, working together in one bell, in a two-way learning framework, being able to challenge assumptions and listen to each other, listen to those priorities. It's only then will you be able to make decisions on what are the earlier we sort of said we need to be very clear and manage expectations, and there was an example given about standpipes or something. And although that might seem small to us, it's probably really big to people on the ground that had expectations that X number of standpipes would be delivered to Y communities, and so having really clear and open dialogue and challenging assumptions, being adaptive in our thinking and programming is, I think, all really important parts of the type of leadership that we do.
And when you do have to say no, right? Because you got to say no. You can't say yes to everything. Have you got any kind of wisdom around that? Particularly, I know it's funny. Actually, I'll go on a quick digression. It's funny you mentioned that word. I didn't tell you this. Actually, some of you guys might not know, but I'm actually part Polynesian, and there's a word in New Zealand Maori called tino rangatiratanga, right, which is very, very similar. It means swimming together as one. It's like a school of fish, and it sounds awesome when you talk about it, right? But I've actually been part of these working groups, and it's very, very difficult to actually implement. And the more people you have who are supposed to be swimming together, the more difficult it is, and you invariably have to say no to people. I'm a landowner in a piece of land in New Zealand, and one of 4,500 people, and we've been trying for 10 years to put some avocados on this piece of land, right? To try and develop it, but still it's just grass. So I'm really interested, Brett, in that context. How do you get the naysayers on board, right? How do you get people to commit even though they might disagree?
Yeah, so it's interesting. You say you're inevitably going to have to say no, and part of it is about taking people on a journey to places and spaces they don't know they want to go yet. So we come with some level of education or training or technical expertise. They come with, you know, a whole lot of cultural and local leadership principles, and only together you can be better. So, you know, bringing people on board with the naysayers, with a change in direction or a change in priorities, is actually a really important part of leadership. And normally that can often take several iterations of dialogue, and so several, you know, consultation sessions, for want of a better word, or really deep listening to what the context, why people are making the decisions they are, and what's driving those decisions. And so I very rarely say yes or no in that initial dialogue, because most of the time we'll get it wrong. And I'll give you a quick example that some of you will be aware of. So you mentioned Herrick before, and when I very first met Herrick, his whole village had literally fallen into the sea, and after an earthquake in Ranonga, between Ranonga and Simbo, and I assume some of you know who we're talking about here, Herrick. And I was having some consultations with that community. You know, this is in 2007, so quite some time ago. And my initial, you know, they said, oh, we need to move the whole village, and I wrongly, my first response was, well, we just don't have the resources to do that. We don't have the dollars. We don't have the roofing iron. We don't have the timber. We don't have, you know, and rather than saying what's driving that, what are your fears about rebuilding here? Obviously, there was a lot. They found temporary solutions, and then found a longer journey to go on, which did involve really good local leadership through Herrick and most of his family to drive a full change in the direction. So they took our resources, and they added in a whole lot of local resources and energy, and they achieved their goal. But my initial reaction was, well, no, that's not possible, and it doesn't actually, you know, there's no science to back that up, and we've got some geotechnical experts that have determined that the rest of the land is, you know, is not going to be prone to further landslides and so forth. And of course, I was wrong on all of those things. So they knew what to do. They knew how to get there. And yeah, it was a really early, valuable leadership lesson. Obviously, in that example, we bring things to the table, which was a technical thing. They brought things to the table, but together we were better. And that's that concept of one bell, or Malparrara Way, two-way learning and two-way dialogue.
Yeah, that's a good story, actually. In fact, I've got Herrick lined up to be one of our speakers. And I said to him, I was like, you've got a story that we need to record, right? Like, what they did, or what you guys did, was remarkable. You know, some of you know this story, but what they did, I mean, Brett didn't give the details, right? That they moved a village of several hundred people. I mean, I've climbed these steps, right? 700 steps. It's like, I don't know, 300 meters, maybe 250 meters elevation. They just moved this whole village up the hill, away from the sea, away from certain resources like fish, and there's even a hot spring that was, you know, down there that they moved away from. Yeah, Herrick's leadership there was amazing. So so I'm going to interview him, actually, because I know that there were some people who didn't want to move, and some people didn't, right? I mean, isn't that right, Rhett? There's some people still, they decided to stay, a few people. Yeah,
correct. So some people stayed temporarily, and then you know, over time, the whole village has relocated, and the houses that are down below are used for specific purposes, but not for permanent dwellings.
Right. Okay. 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 So you've achieved quite a lot of things, and you know, I was quite interested. I'm not sure if you can tell us much or or not, but it was quite interesting in your work advising with the Prime Minister's office, right, in Papua New Guinea with the COVID stuff. But my question really is around, you know, like battle stories, right? So you've achieved some remarkable things, but it's not easy. Some of it might seem simple, but far from easy. You know, have there been times where you've come really close to giving up on a project or an initiative, and what was it that pushed you through? What did you learn from it and grow? In what way did you grow from those experiences?
Yeah, thanks, Ian. I can't tell you how many times I've come close to giving up on projects, and I mean, part of leadership is obviously, you know, that, you know, being very resilient and knowing what your driving principles are, and being quite unwavering from those on a personal level, which will give you that energy to be resilient. Now, I say that acknowledging that I also started this conversation by saying we need to be adaptive and flexible, but that doesn't mean wavering in your personal integrity or your personal drivers around your leadership. In fact, you know, I think they're both quite complementary. You know, I've had you know, several examples in my career where I have had to walk away from a project, but not you know, and acknowledge that it had to press pause for a period of time. That there were circumstances that meant that a particular community or a particular country was not ready for a particular project, and I think acknowledging that is also really important, and communicating that clearly. So that is a really important part of development, knowing when to say the timing's not quite right. I'm going to take these resources or this energy or this program somewhere else, and be prepared to come back when the timing's right. You know, there's you know, a project we're working with in the Solomon Islands at the moment, with an organisation that I work with called Rocket Ship, and it's a clinical training program, mostly training rural doctors around the Pacific. And the Solomon Islands have been talking about this for a number of years, and only very recently have they come back to us and said, actually, the timing's right. And actually, I thought the timing was right 5 years ago. And I when I was in Vanuatu 4 years ago, I thought, well, the timing's right for Vanuatu to have it. But the Vanuatu Ministry of Health wasn't ready at that time. And so I need to, rather than get despondent and frustrated, you need to accept that you know, there is periods of time where you have to just walk away and come back when there's different local leadership or when there's different competing priorities.
And is that something that that attitude or skill, is that something you've developed over time? You know, thinking back to, you know, 25-year-old Brett, what would he do in those situations? Was he more or less perseverant?
I think I was actually more perseverant with less outcomes, and so I would, you know, doggedly push through and try and finish something. I think part of it, you know, a lot of this is dependent on the type of program and the expectations of the donor. It's very easy for me to say, this because I have a very broad spectrum of work that I'm involved with. I do my own personal consulting. I work for the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade on various programs, and the Department of Health in Australia and various ministries of health. And so I have the ability to say, oh, the timing's just not ideal for this. When I was younger, 30 years ago, there was a side of me that just kept pushing through, and I think the outcomes were much more unsustainable than what we're achieving at the moment. And a lot of that's those same principles that I started with around local and adaptive leadership.
Yeah, I think that's good, and I think Logan's got a question actually that sort of relates to this, but to kind of connect it is, I think, we're all engineers, right? And so we have this major problem in that, that's our hammer. We sort of see, the world as everything's a nail, right? Well, we see everything as a ton of technical problem, and one of the traps that I've fallen into is persevering, to some kind of technical outcome, when really, you sort of say, well, would you really want this, right? There's been these issues. And so Logan's question is kind of an interesting one, which is, and you kind of answered it, right? But he says, how do you deal with situations where perhaps a local preference is counter to your recommendation? So a technocrat coming in, we can see what, we think is an obvious technical solution. But we get confused, right? Oh, well, why don't you want this?
Yeah. It's a really difficult skill to challenge assumptions that are made, and to build a common objective, a common narrative. My experience is that normally takes multiple iterations of teaching and training, but also being prepared to be very teachable yourself. And so this is the listening, the listening aspect. You will never come in as a technocrat to those situations and make sustainable change, knowing that you bring a technical skill to the table, and not everyone at the table has that same skill, unless you are seen to be actively listening to what the drivers or what's motivating everyone at the table to make the decisions they're making. So you use that word naysayers, or you really, this whole concept of deep listening. I can't tell you how hard it is and how important it is in every single environment, cultural environment I've worked in. It doesn't change.
I mean, I'll go so far as to say it's important in every environment. We use slightly different vernacular here, but we have this whole program called client empathy, right? And it's mostly about sales, right? And when you think about, okay, well, what's selling? Like, people think it's kind of icky, but you know what? Real good selling is sitting down and listening and thinking, oh, okay, well, what's the problem behind the problem, right? Like, what's this person's deep desire? Nobody wakes up in the morning and thinks, oh, I wish I had a flood study or, a stormwater plan, right? People want something much more fundamental. And so I think it's a good lesson for us. And it's kind of a good segue into the next question, being teachable, right? So you talked about being teachable. So mentors, coaches, so there's kind of two schools of thought on this, and I'm interested in your opinion. So, a group of people talk a lot about the importance of having a mentor, someone in that, and mentors and coaches are a bit different, right? A mentor is sort of someone who gives guidance. A coach is, perhaps someone who's done it before. And a teacher is a bit different again. But you can go to someone maybe older than you and receive mentorship. The other school of thought is this kind of, there's a bit more modern, which is peer-to-peer, right? It's just like get around people who are really, maybe they're only one step ahead of you or not ahead at all, and you go together. What's your, over the years, and especially in the context of advising high-level leaders, You know, what's the Prime Minister of PNG doing? Does he have a mentor? And what's
it's fascinating you raise this one, because it's actually really important to me. And I challenge this concept of mentoring and coaching a little bit, because it plays into, you know, the whole all the concepts I've been talking about. I'm going to use another word, and it's an Aboriginal word from Australia, and it's called a Malparrara. And it's neither a coach or a mentor. It has it's closest to that peer-to-peer concept that you're referring to, but it's very much I bring something to the table and you bring something to the table, and only when that is in a respectful, equal platform will we actually be able to learn anything together. And so it is acknowledging all the skills at the table and being able to bring them together as one bell. And so I'd like us all to try and put this into practice every day. Now, one of the things that's fundamentally different about the way I work is I don't have you know, I don't outwardly talk about the technical skills that I bring to the table. What I want to do in those relationships, like the one with the Prime Minister, and I've got several key relationships around the Pacific that I maintain, you know, almost daily, and we talk usually via WhatsApp and just messaging every couple of days. And that is simply because we both view each other as just equal. We both bring something to the table. We're better together. And even though in this example you're talking about the Prime Minister, or it might be the pandemic controller in Papua New Guinea, or, you know, the Minister of Health, you know, these advisory roles that I've had, each one of them will tell you we were just equal. We both respected each other and learnt a lot from each other during the periods of time we were working together, and we've maintained those relationships as a result. And I think that's a really key difference in the type of mentoring, coaching that I'd like to impress on this group and anyone else that's listening.
Yasser recently completed a course, the Alt MBA. I don't know if you heard of this, but it's I haven't done it actually, but I've done some training, and it's just from the same organization, and I've developed a lot of my philosophy around it. But this peer-to-peer learning, I'm sure Yasser would agree, is quite powerful. And this, you know, I mean, I know a lot of people have mentors, but my experience is that there's some interesting things to hear, but there's a specific time and place where that advice was applicable, and, you know, and sometimes it gets dated. Anyway, so that I agree with you. Freedom's got a question. Do you want to ask it, Freedom? It's kind of a long one. Maybe you can kind of say it more succinctly. You're on mute.
It goes to what you're talking about now. I mean, you spoke about the resourcefulness of the Rananga community when you guys had to come in and move the village. And I kind of bring that back to what's going on in Australia now about the Indigenous voice to Parliament. Like, I keep hearing people talking about the voice speaking to issues affecting Aboriginal communities, and nothing about the voice talking to the broader Australian community. I don't actually think ever since colonization there was ever a point where people were listening to Aboriginal communities just to hear what they think so that they can help shape like a community. Like, we can't continue to be a British colony with their values without kind of having a conversation and saying, oh, look, what can we learn and take from the Indigenous community? So my question really is, you have worked with these communities. Is there space for you to start taking that wisdom or that experience and bringing it to the broader community, so that when people are listening to Aboriginal communities or leaders or people in general, they're not just listening to them about them talking about their issues, but contributing to the broader community?
Yes, very good question, Freedom. And you're right, Australia historically has done this very, very poorly. So we've got a long history, a horrible history of colonization in this country. And then I need to say that we then took that same experience and imposed it on Papua New Guinea as well, our nearest neighbour, a very large country, 15 to 17 million people now, our nearest neighbour, and Papua New Guinea still has this these quite strong memories of this post colonial period and this colonialism that really does need to be challenged. To answer your question about Aboriginal communities in Australia, it's only in the last few years that this we've really started to change the way we engage with Aboriginal people, and this whole style of working together in a Malparrara way is actually something that's there's a lot of work to be done, and a lot of hurt and damage, perhaps irreparable harm that has taken place, that does very much impact on programming and the roles I've done as CEO of health services in Australia. So yes, I agree with you. It's a huge challenge, and we're only just making very small inroads into it now.
That's a good question. Well, Brett's talking to us now, so that's something. Thanks, Freedom. So I've got a question here. So the guys on this call and probably some people listening to this afterwards will be interested, because everyone, well, not everyone, but the people listening to this probably have some kind of dream, a project or something they want to get up. And my question is, when you've got a big vision, and any big vision requires you to kind of carry people with you, right, to achieve it, to implement it. I mean, the question was, what's the word of warning you'd give? But maybe there's two parts. What's one word of warning, and what's one word of encouragement? And this can be in the context of anything, right? Like it might be writing a book, or starting an NGO, or building a commercial building, or something like this. But I think your leadership context, the Malparrara, yeah, it can be applicable. So a word of warning and a word of encouragement.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think first of all on the warning, I think it's really important to make achievable goals and objectives that so that your teams that you've got something really practical and tangible to work with, and that can only come when you've had that open dialogue that's very respectful, and you understand the local context, and you've agreed to a set of objectives with the people you're working with. And so my first word of warning: yes, set a vision and be strategic about that, but also be very practical and pragmatic about what you can and can't implement. A word of encouragement: I think leadership. The world of leadership is shifting, and we really need to rethink how we work with in the environments we work in with First Nations people, and in development context. I think we need to be, very much aware that our leadership is really important, and what you bring to the table, I mean technically, and the way you work is really, really important. So I encourage you all that to challenge that, and to really rethink how the relationships you have and the impact you have on those relationships.
That's good. That makes sense. Okay, so we've got a couple minutes left. There aren't any more questions, but chuck them in if you want. I'm going to ask, this is a bit unscheduled. I'm going to ask Brett to tell a story. It's a good one. Can you tell us the story about the emergency call? This is how I imagine Brett in his like real life, when he's not like, in front of a laptop.
Yeah, so this is a really funny one, and probably quite a classic example of everything that I've said to do, and me not doing it. And I was much younger, much younger. But I've talked a lot about deep listening today, right? And the importance of having listening deeply to every single conversation. And I got a call, as we were talking before, I was heading up this disaster response post tsunami in Western Province of Solomon Islands, and I got a call. There wasn't a lot of a lot of the communications were down, so it was over a radio, and it was a very broken message. And I reacted to that call, and all I heard was that there was an emergency, and it was actually in this same village that I was saying before, that the community were very afraid of further landslides. And of course I heard that there was a further landslide post tsunami, and I heard this call, and what I thought I heard was that there was 4 people that had been injured, or 4 people that had been killed. I wasn't quite sure, and the community were requesting support. And so, I commandeered the local police boat, and I'm a bit gung ho, at these things. I'm fairly competent waterman, and we got off the village, and the seas were too big to land, so we had to I had to jump into the water 400 or 500 meters out to sea and swim in, only to get into the community and say, please. And I was asking for direction where the people had been injured and where they'd been killed, and only to find out that it was actually 4 pigs that had been that had died in the. And it was a very, very important thing to the community. This is their livelihood, right? And so it was a very important message for them to get across. But they just wanted us to know that there actually had been another landslide. And Brett, you told us there wouldn't be any more landslides,
right?
And so it was challenging every bit of my. When I got there, I was out of breath from swimming in. We'd done several hours trying to get there in the first place by boat, only to find out that 4 pigs had been harmed in the process. and I only had myself to laugh at, really. But yeah.
Did anyone laugh? Did they understand?
Oh no, they were laughing.
Okay. Yeah.
They were laughing much deeper than I was deep listening, I can tell you that for free. Yeah. Yeah.
Brett, thank you. It's a pleasure. It's actually a real treat for me to kind of talk to you, because I've never really spoken to you on this much depth before. I'll just quickly throw it up. Is there any little last questions or comments from you guys before we let Brett go back to his normal life?
Yeah, very good. I was very happy with the presentation. I think I like how you're working with the communities. I mean, my experiences with international organizations like World Vision is quite different from, I think they in Africa, they kind of come with, oh, we're gonna solve this problem and not engage. And so the approach that you're really talking about is important. I do think it has to be more widespread. If you can, that would be good. But otherwise, really good. Yeah.
Thanks, Freedom.
So if you want some more reading, just look up PDIA, or problem-driven iterative and adaptive programming, PDIA approach. I'm also happy to send you some of my writings, or send it through to this group on this same concept of the real importance of two-way learning.
Yeah.
And I think that's if you take one thing away from my very painful lessons in many cases, then it's you really do need to think deeply about the conversations you're having, the impact you're having, and to challenge your own assumptions, and what's motivating you and what's motivating others in the room to make the decisions they're making.
Yeah.
Thanks, Brett. Yeah, please do send that through. I can put a link where I post the video, and I'm certain there'll be people who'll be interested. One last thing is giving a bit of a plug for some of the things you're working on. If there might be some people listening to this in a few months' time, even, who might be interested and have technical skills or even money, is there a way to reach you? If they're interested in connecting, how should someone reach out?
Yeah, good question. So, you mentioned Rocket Ship. That's a volunteer organisation, similar to the work many people do with Renonga.org. So you can reach me through Rocket Ship, Pacific, spelt Rocket Ship. It's an acronym, so don't ask me about it. But
right.
I also run a small consulting company called Cowling and Partners, I'm very would be keen to work with like-minded people. My whole team thinks in this same way, and they're a mix of First Nations people. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Great. Well, thank you again, and we appreciate your time, and it's amazing work you're doing. And if there's another way we can support you, please let us know. And we're very grateful for your wisdom.
Yeah, thank you.
Welcome.